What happens when a man has everything? A billion-dollar company, a trophy mistress, and a quiet, unassuming wife he thinks is nothing more than furniture. Julian Thorne was that man. He stood at the top of New York, ready to accept the Innovator of the Year award. And he chose that night, in front of everyone, to publicly humiliate his wife, Amelia, for his mistress. He thought Amelia was weak. He thought she was a nobody. He never bothered to ask who her family was. He's about to find out. Because her father just arrived. And he's not just any father, he's a king. Julian Thorne didn't just live in New York, he owned it. Or so he believed. His company, Thorne Dynamics, was the darling of Wall Street, a titan of robotics and AI that had catapulted him from a moderately wealthy background into the stratosphere of the ultra-rich. His face was on Wired, Forbes, and Time. He was, in his own mind, the architect of the future. And every architect needs a quiet, well-decorated home. That, to Julian, was Amelia. Amelia Thorne, née Duval, was a ghost in his penthouse. She was beautiful in a way that was easy to overlook. Soft, classical features, large grey eyes, and a quiet demeanour that Julian had initially found refreshing. He'd met her at a low-key diplomatic mixer. She'd been introduced as Amelia Duval, an art history post-grad from a good family in Europe. Julian, ever the predator, saw her as the perfect acquisition. Beautiful, well-bred, quiet, and, he assumed, pliable. He needed a wife to complete the picture of the stable, respectable mogul. She was perfect. Their 3-year marriage had been a slow-motion erosion of her presence. Julian's voice was the only one that mattered. "Amelia, the benefit on Thursday," he'd call out, not looking up from his phone as he strode through their cavernous, marble-floored foyer. "You'll be seated at table 14, with the lesser donors. I need you to just smile. Don't try to talk about whatever it is you talk about. Art, flowers, just smile." "Of course, Julian," she would say, her voice barely a murmur. "And that dress you wore last week, the green one, burn it. It made you look provincial. Wear the black one, the one Isabella picked out for you." Isabella. The name hung in the air between them, sharp and toxic. Isabella Vance was Julian's COO. She was everything Amelia was not, sharp, loud, dressed in blade-like silhouettes of Bottega Veneta and Tom Ford. She was a shark, and she was, as everyone in their circle knew, Julian's mistress. Amelia's days were spent in a gilded cage. She managed the household, she attended the charities Julian forgot he was a patron of, and she spoke often on the phone in quiet, rapid German. "Who are you always chattering to?" Julian had asked once, impatiently. "My family. Julian. Just my father." Right. The old Money Vineyard crowd. "Tell your papa I'm too busy for a visit this quarter." "Maybe next year," he scoffed, already texting Isabella. What Julian didn't see was what Amelia was doing when he was gone. He mistook her silence for emptiness. He mistook her stillness for stupidity. He never noticed that the art history books on her desk were actually dense volumes on international finance law. He never saw that the charity she was managing was a complex network of anonymous grants to shell-shocked tech startups, the very ones he was trying to put out of business. He never noticed that when she spoke to her papa in German, her voice changed. The soft, hesitant murmur was gone, replaced by a crisp, authoritative tone that gave precise, complex instructions. "The assets are under-leveraged," she said quietly into her phone one afternoon, looking out over Central Park. "Thorne Dynamics is running on ego. He's exposed. He thinks his Q4 projections are a secret. I've read the full brief. He's about to acquire CyberLux, but he's using his personal shares as collateral, leveraged against the primary trust. A deep, accented voice replied on the other end. And the woman, Vance. Amelia's eyes hardened. She is a liability he insists on promoting. She's sloppy. She's feeding him data that confirms his own bias. They're preparing for the Innovator of the Year gala on Friday. He sees it as his coronation. The board in Altenberg is growing impatient, Liebling. I know, Papa, Amelia said. But I needed to be sure. I gave him every chance to be a man of character. He has failed. Friday. It ends on Friday. Let him have his stage. It will make the lesson that much more permanent. She hung up just as Julian burst through the door, energized and cruel. Amy, God, you're still in that robe? It's noon. Listen, Friday is the big night, the Innovator of the Year award. It's mine. The press will be everywhere. I need you to look presentable, but stay in the background. This is my night. Isabella will be at my main table, of course. Business. You understand. You won't. He didn't wait for a reply. He was already heading to his study, pulling Isabella's name up on his phone, a predatory grin on his face. Amelia stood by the window, watching the city below. Yes, Julian, she whispered to the empty room. I understand perfectly. Isabella Vance was a creature of Julian's own making. She had clawed her way up from a mid-level marketing position to chief operating officer by mirroring his own ruthlessness. She saw Julian not just as a lover, but as a vehicle. And she saw Amelia as a roadblock, a flimsy, pathetic one, but a roadblock nonetheless. Her favorite game was casual, public humiliation, always masked as help. A week before the gala, Isabella had insisted on a team dinner at Maria, a restaurant so exclusive it breathed its own refined air. Julian, of course, had brought Amelia, seating her between himself and Isabella. Oh, Amelia, honey, Isabella had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she placed her hand over Amelia's. That's a fish fork. You're having the fillet. Sweetie, you must be so stressed, planning all those flower arrangements. The table of VPs and board members chuckled lightly. Julian just smirked, entertained. She's a country girl at heart, Isa. You can't blame her. Amelia had simply smiled, retrieved the correct fork and said, You're right, Isabella. My mind is elsewhere. I was just calculating the debt-to-equity ratio of the new acquisition. It seems ambitious. The table went silent. Julian's face darkened. Isabella's smile faltered. Don't be ridiculous, Amelia, Julian snapped. She reads a headline and thinks she's a banker. Eat your steak. The subject was dropped, but Isabella had seen a flicker of something in Amelia's eyes. A dangerous spark. She resolved to crush it. Her next attack was more direct. 2 days before the gala, Amelia had done the one thing she never did. She visited Julian's office. She came bearing a peace offering, a framed photograph from the early days of their marriage, a rare moment of genuine smiles on a trip to the coast. She thought, perhaps, one last time, she could appeal to the man she had once believed him to be. She stepped out of the private elevator onto the 70th floor executive wing. The entire floor was open-plan glass and steel, culminating in Julian's corner office. He was in there, but his back was to the door. He was with Isabella, and they weren't talking business. Amelia stopped, hidden by a large concrete pillar. Julian had Isabella pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window, his hands possessively on her waist. He's giving me the award, Julian was saying, his voice thick. The mayor himself. And after? Isabella purred, tracing the lapel of his suit. After you win. What about the mouse? It's getting embarrassing, Jay. She's a drag on your brand." I know, Julian sighed, pulling back. But the divorce, it's complicated. Her family, they're weird, old world, connected somehow. It's not the right time." "Then make it the right time," Isabella hissed, "or I will. I want to be the one on your arm, Jay. Not that pale, useless ghost. Prove it to me. On Friday, prove to everyone that I am your partner, that I am the one who built this with you. Issa, don't prove it, or I walk, and I take the Cyberlux integration plans with me." Amelia didn't need to hear any more. She saw the calculation in Julian's eyes. He would choose the path of least resistance, the path to his own glory. Quietly, Amelia stepped back into the elevator. She looked at the photograph in her hands, the two smiling people on the beach. She let it slip from her grasp. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, she walked out, leaving the shattered glass and the smiling memory behind on the cold marble floor. When Julian arrived home that night, Amelia was in the library, reading. "You didn't come by the office," he said, accusingly. "No, Julian, I got held up. I trust your meeting with Isabella was productive?" He narrowed his eyes, searching for sarcasm, but her face was a perfect, placid mask. "It was. We're finalizing the gala speech." He tossed a velvet box onto the table in front of her. "This. Wear this. And the black dress. And for God's sake, do something with your hair. Look alive." Amelia opened the box. Inside was a necklace, a stunning, gaudy cascade of diamonds. It was loud, expensive, and completely tasteless. It was Isabella's style. "It's beautiful, Julian," Amelia said, her voice soft as silk. "I'll wear it with pride." He grunted, satisfied. He had placated his wife, secured his COO, and his award was waiting. Julian Thorne was in complete control. The Plaza Ballroom was drowning in opulence. A sea of black ties and couture gowns shimmered under the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. This was the Innovator of the Year Gala, the absolute apex of New York's tech and finance society. And tonight, it was Julian Thorne's coronation. Amelia stood beside him on the red carpet, the garish diamond necklace feeling like a lead weight on her collarbone. The black dress was, as he'd demanded, elegant but forgettable. "Julian! Julian!" The cameras flashed, a wall of blinding light. "Julian, over here! Who are you wearing?" "Tom Ford," Julian boomed, flashing his perfect predatory smile. He wrapped his arm tightly around Amelia's waist, pulling her into his side like an accessory. "And this, of course, is my wonderful wife, Amelia." "Amelia, what are you wearing?" a reporter shouted. Amelia opened her mouth, but Julian cut her off. "She's wearing my diamonds," he laughed, tapping the necklace. "What else matters?" The reporters laughed with him. Amelia smiled, a pale, tight expression that didn't reach her eyes. Inside, the ballroom was buzzing. Julian, in his element, dragged Amelia from group to group, a king holding court. He introduced her not by her name, but by her function. "This is my wife, Amelia. She keeps the home fires burning, eh? Senator, lovely to see you. You know my wife, Amelia. She's my wife." Then, Isabella Vance made her entrance. She was in a liquid silver gown that seemed poured onto her body, her black hair slicked back. She didn't walk. She stalked. The room's energy shifted to her. She bypassed the receiving line and walked directly to Julian, placing a possessive kiss on his cheek. "Julian, darling, you look incredible," she purred, ignoring Amelia completely. "Isa, you made it." Julian's voice was warm in a way Amelia hadn't heard in years. "You look dynamic." "I am dynamic," Isabella whispered, loud enough for Amelia to hear. "We need to talk. The Cyberlux deal. There's a rumor of a new bidder, a big one. We need to close tonight." Julian's smile tightened. "Who? Who's bidding?" "I don't know. The name is locked down. Altenberg Global. Ever heard of it?" Amelia's hand, resting on her champagne glass, didn't even tremble. "No," Julian snapped. "Never. They're nobodies. A holding company. I'll crush them." He turned, suddenly aware of Amelia, and his irritation found its target. "Amelia, go. Get me another drink, and get one for Isabella." Amelia looked at him. "Julian, there's waitstaff everywhere." "Don't argue with me," he hissed, his fingers digging into her arm. "Just be useful for once. Go." It was a test, a public declaration for Isabella's benefit. He was proving who held the power, the cluster of people around them. CEOs, politicians, journalists, all saw it. They saw the mouse being sent on an errand. Amelia's gaze was unreadable. She nodded. "Of course, Julian. Isabella, what would you like? Champagne, the good stuff? Not whatever you're drinking." Isabella smirked. Amelia turned and walked toward the bar, but she didn't get 5 feet. Julian, in a grand gesture to make a point to the senator beside him, swung his arm out and, accidentally, backhanded her, sending her full flute of champagne cascading down the front of her black dress. The music stuttered, a collective gasp. "Oh, God," Julian said, his voice a performance of exasperation. "Amelia, really? Clumsy, clumsy, clumsy. You've ruined the dress. And you're soaked." Isabella let out a high, cruel laugh. "Oh, mouse, you really can't take her anywhere." Amelia stood there, champagne dripping from her hair and the gaudy necklace. The room was spinning, all eyes on her. The humiliation was total. Julian, his face a mask of annoyance, didn't offer a napkin. He didn't help. He looked at her, soaked and small, and made his choice. "Honestly, Amelia," he said, his voice cold and loud, "why don't you just go? Go home. Fix yourself. You're making a scene. This is a professional event." He turned his back on her. He put his arm around Isabella's silver-clad waist. "Isabella, come. I want you to meet Senator Davies. He understands innovation." He walked away, leaving his wife standing alone in the center of the room, a spectacle of public disgrace. Amelia stood perfectly still for 10 seconds. The whispers were deafening. She looked at Julian's back. She looked at Isabella, who glanced over her shoulder, a look of triumphant venom on her face. Amelia didn't cry. She didn't run. She turned, her back straight as a rod, and walked calmly. Not toward the exit, but toward a quiet alcove by the ballroom service entrance. She pulled out her phone. The uniformed security guard at the door, hired by the venue, moved to stop her. "Ma'am, service only." He stopped when 2 men, dressed in impossibly sharp, dark suits with earpieces, materialized from the shadows. They flanked the alcove, their eyes scanning the room. The venue guard blinked, confused, and stepped back. Amelia hit a single number on her speed dial. "Papa," she said, her voice no longer the whisper of Amy, but the clear, cold command of Amelia. "It's done." Julian Thorne felt the air change the moment Amelia was gone. The brief, awkward silence was filled by his own booming laugh. "My apologies, everyone. A small domestic spill. Now, as I was saying about the future of automated logistics..." He was high on the adrenaline of the confrontation. He had done it. He had put the mouse in her place and anointed his queen, all in one move. Isabella was radiant beside him, her hand now resting possessively on his lower back. They were the power couple, the real power couple. An hour later, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed, a drum roll. The MC, a famous news anchor, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, It is the moment we've all been waiting for, the Innovator of the Year award. This year, the choice was unanimous. This man hasn't just changed the market, he has created it. From a small garage startup to a global powerhouse, please welcome the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, the Innovator of the Year, Julian Thorne. The room erupted in applause. Julian kissed Isabella, a full, public kiss that left no room for interpretation. He strode onto the stage, his arms raised in victory. He was a Roman emperor. "Thank you, thank you," he beamed, accepting the heavy crystal award. "Thank you. What a night." He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. "They say innovation is a lonely road. They're wrong. You cannot build the future alone. You need a partner." His eyes found Isabella in the front row. "You need someone who sees the world the way you do. Someone who isn't afraid to take risks, to be ruthless, to cut away the dead weight that holds you back." The crowd murmured, sensing the drama. This was better than an awards show. It was a public execution of his marriage. "I built Thorne Dynamics from nothing. But I had help. I had a partner who was there in the trenches with me, not at home, arranging flowers." A few people laughed, nervously. "A partner who understands that to win, you have to be willing to burn the old world down. So I want to share this award tonight with my true partner, my inspiration, my COO, Isabella Vance. Isa, stand up. Let them see you." Isabella stood, tears in her eyes, blowing him a kiss. It was the ultimate fuck you to the departed Amelia. Julian was about to continue, to launch into his Q&A about the Cyberlux acquisition, when the MC's voice cut in, suddenly tinny and confused. Mr. Thorne, apologies, I'm just getting word." "What is it?" Julian snapped, annoyed by the interruption. We have a surprise guest, a keynote speaker who was delayed at the airport. He has requested to say a few words before the Q&A. Julian was furious. "A surprise speaker? Now? Who is it? Bill Gates? Elon? I wasn't briefed on this." "No, sir," the MC said, his face pale as he read the card just handed to him. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, a warm welcome for our distinguished patron and surprise keynote, His Serene Highness, Grand Duke Leopold of Altenburg." A ripple of confusion went through the new money crowd. Who? But in the back of the room, Senator Davies, the governor, and the two members of the Rockefeller family who were present. They all stood up. Instantly, Julian and Isabella stared, perplexed, as a man moved from the same alcove Amelia had disappeared into. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and a military straight posture. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy suit, but he moved with an aura of absolute, ancestral power. This was not a man who asked for respect. He was respect. He was flanked by the same two serious-looking men who had guarded Amelia. They weren't security. They were sentinels. "Altenburg," Isabella whispered, her face ashen. "As in, Altenburg Global." Julian's blood ran cold. The Grand Duke walked onto the stage. He did not shake Julian's hand. He did not acknowledge the award. He walked straight to the podium, and the MC, a man famous for grilling world leaders, simply handed him the microphone and stepped back. Leopold of Altenburg looked out at the glittering crowd, his blue eyes like ice chips. "Good evening." His voice was a low, cultured rumble, accented and amplified, silencing the entire ballroom. "I am Leopold." He turned his head slightly and looked, for the first time, at Julian Thorne. "A fascinating speech. Mr. Thorne." The silence in the ballroom was no longer polite. It was heavy and absolute. Julian Thorne, who had commanded this room moments before, was now a statue, a prop on his own stage. Grand Duke Leopold surveyed the crowd. His gaze was that of a man who owned the building, the city, and quite possibly the air they were breathing. "I am here tonight for 2 reasons," Leopold began, his voice calm and lethal. "The first is as a patron of true innovation. My family's holding company, the Altenburg Global Initiative, has long believed in funding the future. We believe in integrity, in honor, in character." He let the word character hang in the air, a deliberate indictment. "We have been, quietly, observing the American tech sector, looking for a new flagship investment, a new division to build upon. We look for vision, but we also look for stability." Julian, sensing an opportunity, stepped forward, his arrogant smirk re-emerging. "Your Serene Highness, Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Dynamics. Perhaps we could—" Leopold raised one hand, palm out. Not a large gesture, but it stopped Julian as effectively as a brick wall. "I am aware of who you are, Mr. Thorne," the Duke said, his voice dropping a degree. "I am also aware of Miss Vance." Isabella, who had been preening, froze. "The Altenburg Global Initiative," Leopold continued, turning back to the stunned audience, "is a $500 billion strategic fund. We do not bid on companies. We acquire them. We are, as of 9:01 p.m. this evening, the new majority partner in the Cyberlux venture." Julian's world tilted. "What? That's impossible. My deal was closing tonight." "Your deal," Leopold said, "was a leveraged buyout using personal assets. The board of Cyberlux preferred cash. My cash." You, Julian was sputtering. Isabella looked like she was going to be sick. The company, their prize, the thing she had used to blackmail him, was gone, snatched from under them. "But that is not the main reason I am here," the Grand Duke said, his tone shifting from corporate raider to something far more personal. "I am here as a father." A confused murmur. "My family. We are from a small, quiet part of Europe. We do not broadcast our presence. We believe in the old ways, that a person's worth is in their actions, not their title. My daughter felt the same. She is a woman of formidable intellect, with degrees in finance from LSE and law from Yale. But she worried. She worried that the world would only see her title, that men would only want her for her name." Julian's face was a mask of confusion. He didn't understand. "So, 3 years ago," Leopold said, his eyes finding a spot at the back of the room, "she made a request to live a normal life, to come to America with a different name, her mother's name, Duval, to see if she could find a partner who would love her. Amelia Duval. Not the person she truly is. She wanted, as she said, to see the wolves in their natural habitat." Julian stopped breathing. Amelia. Duval. Her mother's name. German. Papa. Old family. Weird. Connected. "Oh my God," Isabella whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Leopold's eyes bored into Julian's. She met a man she thought was a builder, a visionary. She respected his drive. She fell in love with him. She gave him her loyalty, her trust, her capital. Julian staggered back, his hand grabbing the podium for support. "Capital? What capital? She has nothing. She has everything, you fool!" Leopold's voice was suddenly a roar, the aristocratic calm shattered, revealing the fury of a lion. "Her provincial family trust, which you so arrogantly dismissed in your prenuptial agreement, is the primary silent investor in Thorne Dynamics. My daughter's pocket money funded your entire Series B." The ballroom was in chaos. People were standing, phones out. This was a hostile takeover, It was a soap opera. It was the end of Julian Thorne. My daughter is a quiet person. She is kind. She is forgiving. I told her you were a viper. She wanted to see the good in you. But a man who would belittle his wife, a man who would publicly humiliate the mother of his unborn child. A new collective, horrified gasp. Julian, white as a sheet, looked into the crowd. Unborn. No, she's not. She is, Leopold said, his voice shaking with a rage that was terrifying to behold. And you, boy, you shoved her. In front of them. The Duke turned. But my daughter is not just a kind woman. She is the heir to Altenberg. And she has a new title. He gestured to the back of the ballroom. For too long, the Altenberg Initiative has been managed by committee. It is time for a single, focused vision. I am here tonight, as my final act as chairman, to announce the new global CEO of the $500 billion Altenberg Global Initiative. Please welcome my daughter, Her Serene Highness, Princess Amelia of Altenberg. The world stopped. All eyes snapped from the stage to the back of the room. The alcove, the double doors of the service entrance swung open, pushed by the two sentinel-like guards, and Amelia walked out. But it was not Amy. It was not the mouse. She had shed the stained, cheap-looking black dress. She was now wearing what was beneath it, a stunning, simple, impossibly elegant gown of deep sapphire blue. Her hair, which had been damp and stringy, was now pinned up in a severe, regal chignon. The gaudy diamond necklace from Julian was gone. In its place was a simple, single, perfect strand of pearls. She was no longer slouched. Her back was straight. Her chin was high. She didn't look like a wife. She looked like a queen. She walked through the center of the ballroom, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. The whispers were a hurricane. It's her? A princess? He was cheating on a princess. He had no idea. Julian's legs gave out. He physically stumbled, grabbing the podium. Amelia! He whimpered. The name was a question, a plea. Isabella Vance was completely and totally frozen. Her entire life, her career, her win over the mouse. It all just evaporated. The woman she'd tormented was not just old money. She was ancient money. She was titled money. Amelia ascended the steps to the stage. She didn't look at Julian. She didn't look at Isabella. She walked directly to her father, who kissed her on both cheeks. "Well done, Liebling," he murmured. "Thank you for coming, Papa," she replied, her voice crisp and clear. He handed her the microphone. She turned to the crowd. Her eyes were not the soft, grey puddles Julian knew. They were chips of slate. "Good evening," she said. Her voice, no longer hesitant, filled the room. It was the same authoritative tone she used on the phone. "My father is, as usual, a bit too dramatic." A light chuckle from the crowd. She had them. "I am Amelia. For 3 years I have been observing. I came to this country to learn, and I have learned a great deal." She finally turned her head and looked at Julian. He was a broken man. "Amy, please, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I love you, Amelia held up a hand. He stopped talking. "You love power, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You loved what you thought I was, a weak, controllable asset. You thought my family's provincial trust was some quaint vineyard in Germany. You signed a pre-nuptial agreement you drafted, an agreement designed to protect your assets from me." She smiled, a thin, sharp, terrible smile. "I cannot thank you enough for that. Your lawyers were adequate, but mine, the ones who reviewed it from Geneva, were better. You see, the agreement you signed so protectively, also contained a clause, a morals clause, that in the event of public infidelity and humiliation, all shared assets and any assets derived from joint investments revert to the wronged party. Julian's face went from white to green. Joint investments? What? We have no joint investments. My company is mine. Is it? Amelia said, turning back to the audience. Let's review. My personal trust, the Duval Trust, made a Series B investment of $150 million. That investment gave me, us, a 62% controlling stake in Thorn Dynamics. You were so eager for the cash you never bothered to do your due diligence on Amelia Duval. You thought I was just your wife. She looked at Isabella. And you, Miss Vance. You were correct. The Cyberlux deal was critical, which is why I bought it. The Altenberg Global Initiative's new technology wing will be absorbing its assets. And of course, its talent. My husband's company, however, is redundant. She turned back to Julian. His Innovator of the Year award had slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the stage. As the majority stakeholder of Thorn Dynamics, Amelia announced, I am calling an emergency board meeting, effective 9 a.m. tomorrow. My first motion will be to remove Julian Thorn as CEO on the grounds of gross negligence, fiduciary mismanagement, and a violation of the morals clause. You can't, Julian shrieked. I can, Amelia said. And I will. My second motion will be to dissolve the company. Its valuable assets, the engineers, the patents I funded, will be absorbed into the AGI. Its liabilities, her eyes swept over Julian and Isabella, will be liquidated. She looked at Julian, a man who was now, officially, worth nothing. You wanted my stage, Julian, Isabella had said. This is my night. Amelia leaned into the microphone. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Father, shall we go? She handed the mic back to the stunned MC. She, her father, and her security detail walked off the stage, leaving Julian Thorn and Isabella Vance in the ruins of their lives, illuminated by 1,000 flashing camera phones. The aftermath was not a news story. It was a detonation. By the time Julian and Isabella stumbled off the stage, they were pariahs. The guests, the senators, the bankers, the CEOs avoided their gaze. A wall of press surged forward, but not for Julian. They swarmed Amelia. Princess Amelia, a comment. When did you plan this? How much is Thorn Dynamics worth? Amelia didn't slow down. She and her father, flanked by their security, moved through the chaos like a battleship through water. Julian, wait! Julian cried out, running after them. Amelia, please! Our baby! You can't do this! I love you! Amy! Amelia stopped at the ballroom doors. She turned, and the entire room held its breath. She looked at him. This screaming, pathetic man. You did not love Amy. You despised her. You belittled her. You humiliated her. And you put your hands on her while she was carrying your child. The princess doesn't forgive that. But Amy does. Then it's okay, he sobbed, grasping. No, Amelia said, her voice flat. It means Amy is giving you a mercy Amy would. The princess would have you jailed for fraud. The princess would have Ms. Vance sued for corporate espionage. Amy is just taking her company back, and she is filing for divorce. Goodbye, Julian. She turned and walked out the door. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal and financial obliteration. Julian's corporate credit cards were declined before he even got home. The locks on the penthouse had been changed. His key to the private elevator no longer worked. He was, quite literally, left on the street in his tuxedo. The 9 a.m. board meeting was a 10-minute conference call. Amelia phoning in from a private jet, stated her case. The remaining board members who had seen their stock options evaporate due to Julian's recklessness and were now facing a $500 billion titan, voted unanimously. Julian Thorne was removed. Isabella Vance was fired, with a clause for moral turpitude. The press was relentless. "Princess Incognito," screamed the New York Post. "The Wolf of Wall Street meets a real lioness." Forbes ran a detailed breakdown. How Julian Thorne's ego lost him $1 billion empire and a $500 billion heiress. Julian's life was over. He was a laughing stock. The prenup, which he had his high-priced lawyers review, was ironclad. He had insisted on the clauses. He had insisted she keep her little family money separate. And she had. That little family money had just swallowed him whole. Isabella fared no better. She was the other woman in the biggest scandal of the decade. She was blacklisted. No firm would touch her. Her plans for the Cyberlux integration were useless, as Amelia's AGI team had a better, more robust plan already in motion. Isabella had been played, not just by Amelia, an opponent she never saw, but by Julian, a man she'd overestimated. Julian tried to fight. He lawyered up, but his lawyers were met by a team from Geneva. They didn't just have documents, they had everything. They had every text message he'd ever sent Isabella on a company phone. They had the financial reports Amelia had been reading in the library. Reports that proved Julian had been cooking the books for his Q4 projections, a fact he'd hidden from the board, but not from his quiet wife. He was facing not just divorce, but federal fraud charges. 6 months had passed since the night of the gala. 6 months since the Plaza Reckoning, as the press had gleefully dubbed it. The world had moved on, as it always does, but the orbits of the 3 central figures had been irrevocably and violently altered. For Julian Thorne, life was no longer a penthouse view. It was a second-floor, beige-carpeted, 2-bedroom apartment in a sprawling, characterless complex in Fort Lee, New Jersey. The view over the Hudson was still there, but it was a bitter, distant caricature of the God's eye view he had once commanded. He sat at a cheap IKEA desk, a high-end microphone, a relic from his old life, plugged into an aging laptop. The rest of the room was sparse, furnished with the few items the Geneva lawyers hadn't deemed derived from joint assets. A broken, glued-back-together Innovator of the Year award sat on his bookshelf, a monument to his own stupidity. He was recording. "And that's the real danger, people," he said, his voice, once a booming instrument of command, now thin and reedy, trying to project a charisma it no longer possessed. "It's the hidden enemy, the person you trust, the one who smiles while they slip the knife in. They call it female empowerment. I call it a hostile takeover." He paused for effect, staring at the sound wave on his screen. "This is the Phoenix Project, Episode 12. I'm Julian Thorne, and I'm here to tell you how to rise from the ashes of a strategic character assassination." His podcast had, as of that morning, 14 subscribers. 12 of them, he suspected, were bots. He was a joke, a punchline at the very cocktail parties he had once hosted. The settlement hadn't just taken his company, his homes, and his art. It had taken his name. Thorne was no longer a brand. It was a cautionary tale. The fraud charges had been dangled over his head, a guillotine held by a silken thread. To avoid federal prison, he had signed everything away. His prenup, the one he had been so proud of, had been the very document that disemboweled him. The morals clause, the Duval Trust clause. It was all there. He had signed his own execution warrant. A sharp rap on his apartment door made him jump. It was the mailman, looking annoyed, with a certified letter. Julian signed for it. It was from a law firm in Geneva. His hands, no longer steady, fumbled with the thick cardstock. It wasn't a new threat. It was a conclusion. The dissolution of your marriage to Amelia Duval-Altenberg is hereby finalized by the Canton of Geneva. It was done. He sank onto his cheap sofa, the letter in his hand. He tried to summon the rage, the fire he'd once had, but all he felt was a vast, hollow, cold. He had lost. He hadn't just been outplayed. He had been playing a different, smaller game all along. He tried to call Isabella. He had tried, in the first few weeks, to find her, to team up, to something. But her number had been disconnected. Her email bounced. She had vanished. He was, for the first time in his life, completely and utterly alone. He looked at his laptop. The dangers of female ambition, he muttered, trying out a new title. He had learned nothing. Isabella Vance, now known as Isa Martin, stepped off a city bus in a drizzle, shielding her hair with a copy of the Chicago Tribune. She walked into a grey, brutalist office building, swiping a simple plastic keycard. She was a content strategist for a mid-level regional insurance provider. Her life was no longer Tom Ford, Maria, and private jets. It was Ann Taylor Loft, a packed lunch in a Tupperware container, and a cubicle that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. She had been blacklisted, erased. The moral turpitude clause in her firing meant she'd received no severance. The scandal had made her unemployable in any high finance or tech circle. She was toxic. She was the mistress who had helped humiliate a princess. It was a brand she couldn't escape. So she'd done what she'd always done. She adapted. She was a shark, and she would survive, even in this small, muddy pond. She sat at her desk, booting up the old Dell computer. Her 26-year-old manager, a man named Kyle with an unfortunate soul patch, walked by. "Big day, Isa," he chirped. "The Q3 analytics for the bumper-to-bumper campaign are in. Try to make the PowerPoint look snappy this time." "You got it, Kyle," she said, her smile a rigor mortis grimace. As she worked, collating mind-numbing data, her eyes drifted to a magazine on her colleague's desk. It was the new issue of Time. The cover was a painting, a regal, severe, and beautiful portrait. Amelia, not in a gown, but in a severe, modern boardroom suit. Her hair was pulled back, her gaze was direct, intelligent, and utterly uncompromising. Her pregnancy was visible, a subtle but unmistakable symbol of her power. The headline, "The Princess CEO." How Amelia Altenberg is redefining global power. Isabella stared at it. She felt a familiar, hot bile rise in her throat. But it wasn't just anger. It was something else. A cold, sharp, and painful respect. She had misjudged. She had seen Amelia as a mouse, a soft obstacle to be removed. She had never, not once, considered that Amelia was a lioness in repose, that the entire marriage, the submissive wife act, was a 3-year-long due diligence. Amelia hadn't been a victim. She had been a scout. She played us, Isabella whispered to herself. She played us all. She saw it now. Amelia hadn't just won. She had set the board, chosen the pieces, and dictated the rules of engagement. The gala wasn't a humiliation, it was a trigger. A carefully planned casus belli. Isabella looked at her PowerPoint. Bumper to bumper. She had been Julian's COO. She had been on the verge of everything. And now she was here. She hadn't just been a liability he'd cast aside. She'd been a pawn in Amelia's game, a useful, predictable fool. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and opened a new slide. Q3 analytics. She would survive. She would claw her way back. It would take a decade, but she would do it. And this time she would never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. The boardroom was silent, floating 40 stories above Lake Geneva. The snow-capped peak of Mont Blanc was visible in the distance. At the head of the 40-foot glass table sat Amelia of Altenburg. She was 8 months pregnant, and she was, unequivocally, in charge. The Altenburg Global Initiative, the $500 billion sleeping giant of a fund, was now awake, and it was hungry. The projections for the new AGI US Innovation Hub are acceptable, Amelia said, her voice quiet, but echoing in the perfect acoustics. The dozen VPs, grizzled veterans of finance and tech, leaned in. But acceptable is not why we are here. She turned to a man at her right, a man in his 50s with the bright, nervous eyes of a genius. Dr. Aris, she said, you were the head of R&D at Thorne Dynamics, my predecessors. Notes said your research into quantum dot energy storage was academically interesting, but commercially unviable. He cut your funding. Dr. Aris swallowed, nodding. He did? Julian. He wanted a new app. Something for the shareholders. He said my work was too slow, too expensive. Amelia nodded, tapping her stylus on the screen. He was wrong. I read your original thesis, the one you published before you joined his company. It is the single most brilliant piece of material science I have read in a decade. The doctor looked stunned. Julian Thorne wanted to build a brand, Amelia said, her eyes sweeping the table. We are here to build the future. Dr. Aris, the AGI is giving your lab a new, unlimited budget. I want a working prototype in 18 months. I am liquidating, as my predecessor would say, the division that was working on his social media app. You will have their entire staff. Can you do it? Dr. Aris, a man who had been belittled and sidelined for 3 years, looked at his new CEO. He saw not a princess, but a visionary. Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, Your Highness. Yes, I can. Good, Amelia said. And please, call me Amelia. Her father, Grand Duke Leopold, sat at the far end of the table. He was Chairman Emeritus, a title he'd invented, which, he claimed, meant he could attend all the meetings and do none of the work. He watched his daughter, a profound, overwhelming pride in his eyes. He had unleashed her. He had watched her turn a humiliating personal wound into a global strategic victory. She was, he knew, a far better leader than he had ever been. The meeting adjourned. Amelia walked slowly from the boardroom to her private adjoining chambers. It was not a palace, but a sleek, modern apartment. A nursery, an office, and a bedroom. Her assistant, a sharp Swiss woman named Elara, was waiting. Your Highness, Elara said, offering a tablet and a single thick envelope. This just arrived from the legal department. Amelia looked at the envelope, the Geneva postmark. She knew what it was. And, Elara said, this. She held up the new Time magazine. Amelia looked at the cover. The Princess CEO. She let out a small, dry laugh. They still don't get it, do they? They are still so obsessed with the title. It is a powerful image, Ma'am. It is a distraction, Amelia said, though she took it. She sat in a comfortable chair overlooking the lake. She ignored the magazine and took the envelope. She opened it. The final decree. Dissolution. A single word on a single page that undid 3 years of her life. She had expected to feel something. Triumph, anger, regret. Instead, she felt a profound, quiet click, like a heavy locked door swinging open. It was the sound of her past moving into its proper place. She picked up a pen and signed the final acknowledgement paper. Amelia Duval Altenburg. She was not a wife. She was not a victim. The princess was a role she played for the public, just as Amy the Mouse had been a role she'd played for Julian. They were costumes. She stood, holding the signed paper, and walked to the nursery. The room was simple, elegant, and filled with books on science, art, and history. She placed her hand on her stomach, feeling a strong, impatient kick. She thought of Julian in his rented room, shouting into a void. She thought of Isabella in her grey cubicle, burning with bitter ambition. They were tragic figures, trapped in the past, obsessed with what they had lost. Amelia looked out at the mountains. She was not looking back. She was looking forward. "He thought I was his dead weight," she whispered to her unborn child. "He forgot. Weight is just another word for gravity. And gravity holds the whole world in place." She put the divorce decree down on her desk, beside the blueprints for the new AGI US headquarters. She was done being a wife, and she was done being a secret. It was time to rule. In the end, Julian Thorne wasn't destroyed by a global corporation or a powerful duke. He was destroyed by his own arrogance. He had the world in his hands, a brilliant, powerful, and loyal partner, but he was so blinded by his own reflection, he couldn't see her. He mistook her silence for weakness. He mistook her kindness for stupidity. He learned, too late, that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Amelia didn't just take back her company. She took back her life, and she built an empire on the ashes of his ego. What did you think of this story? Do you believe in karma? Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Julian's downfall and Amelia's ultimate power move. If you loved this drama, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see a story of justice served, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every single week. We see you and we appreciate you. Thanks for watching. Everyone at the gala stopped breathing when Isabel threw the gift on the floor. She pointed a manicured finger at Sarah and laughed a cruel sound that echoed off the marble walls. "A dirty old diary," she shrieked, clutching Alexander's arm. "This is what you give the new CEO of Thorne Enterprises. God, Sarah, you really are pathetic." Alexander didn't defend his wife. He just looked away, ashamed. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply picked up the book, dusted it off, and whispered, "I see." Isabel thought she had won. She thought she had humiliated the wife to clear the way for herself. But she didn't know that the dirty diary contained a signature that was worth $4 billion and the power to destroy them both. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco didn't just sparkle. They seemed to judge you. At least that was how Sarah Thorne felt as she smoothed the fabric of her 3-year-old navy dress. It was sensible, modest, and completely invisible in a sea of red, silk, gold, sequins, and diamonds that cost more than Sarah's childhood home. Tonight was the night. Her husband, Alexander Thorne, was officially being named the CEO of Thorne & Codum, the logistics empire his father had built, but which Alexander had modernized. Sarah stood near a pillar, clutching a small wrapped package. Her hands were trembling. She wasn't trembling because of the crowd. She was trembling because of the woman standing next to her husband. Isabel DuPont. Isabel was everything Sarah was not. Tall, statuesque, and wearing a custom-made emerald gown that clung to her body like a second skin. She was Alexander's VP of marketing. But everyone in the room, perhaps even the waiters, knew the truth. The way Isabel's hand lingered on Alexander's bicep. The way Alexander leaned down to whisper in her ear, ignoring the investors waiting to shake his hand. Sarah watched them from across the room. 10 years. She had been with Alexander for 10 years. She had worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his MBA when his father cut him off. She had clipped coupons so he could buy his first tailored suit. She had been his foundation. But now that the skyscraper was built, it seemed he no longer needed the foundation. "He looks happy, doesn't he?" a voice sneered. Sarah turned to see Mrs. Gable, the wife of a board member, holding a martini. Mrs. Gable's eyes darted to the package in Sarah's hands. "Is that your gift, dear? It looks quaint." "It's meaningful," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the turmoil in her gut. "It's something he's wanted for a long time. Something from before." Mrs. Gable smirked and walked away, clearly uninterested in meaningful things. The music swelled, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage. Alexander took the microphone, his charisma radiating through the room. He spoke about innovation, about the future, about profits. He thanked the board. He thanked the investors. He even thanked Isabel for her tireless dedication to the brand. He did not mention Sarah. As the applause thundered, Isabel took the mic. And now, she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We have a tradition to uphold, gifts for the man of the hour. I believe his lovely wife Sarah is here somewhere. Sarah, darling, come up." It was a trap. Sarah knew it. Isabel never invited her to anything unless it was to highlight the contrast between them. The glamorous executive versus the dowdy housewife. Sarah stepped out of the shadows. The walk to the stage felt like walking to the gallows. The crowd parted their eyes, boring into her. She could hear the whispers. "That's the wife. She looks like a librarian. Does she know about Isabel?" Sarah climbed the stairs. Alexander looked at her, his expression tight. There was no love in his eyes, only annoyance. "Sarah," he muttered off mic, "you didn't have to bring a gift up here. You could have left it at the table." "Isabel called me up," Sarah replied softly. Isabel stepped forward, beaming. "Oh, nonsense, Alex. We all want to see what the woman who knows you best got you for your big night." She snatched the package from Sarah's hands before Sarah could offer it. The wrapping paper was simple brown craft paper tied with a piece of twine. Compared to the piles of Gucci and Rolex boxes on the side table, it looked like garbage. "Eco-friendly," Isabel joked into the microphone. The crowd chuckled. Isabel tore the paper open. She paused. She reached into the paper and pulled out the object. It was a small, leather-bound book. The leather was cracked and peeling. The pages were yellowed. It smelled faintly of mildew and old tobacco. It looked like something you would find in a donation bin at a Goodwill. Silence fell over the ballroom. Isabel stared at it, then looked at Sarah. Then she did the worst thing possible. She laughed. It wasn't a polite giggle. It was a full-throated, incredulous laugh that invited everyone else to join in. "A diary," Isabel announced, holding the rotting book up by one corner, as if it were contaminated. "Sarah, honey, did you raid an attic, or did you dig this out of the trash on your way in?" A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. "It's not a diary," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise. "It's a first edition field journal from 1922. It belonged to—" "Oh, spare us the history lesson," Isabel interrupted, tossing the book onto the table of expensive gifts. It landed with a dull thud next to a set of platinum car keys. "Alex just closed a $100 million merger, Sarah. He needs things that fit his future, not dusty junk from the past." Isabel turned to Alexander, placing a hand on his chest. I, on the other hand, got you something real." She snapped her fingers. A waiter brought out a sleek black box. Inside was a Patek Philippe watch encrusted with diamonds. "To match your new status, baby." Alexander took the watch, his eyes lighting up. He looked at the diamond watch, then at the old leather book, and finally at Sarah. This was the moment. The moment he could defend her. The moment he could tell everyone that the book was what he had cried about losing years ago, his grandfather's lost journal, the one thing that connected him to the man who started the company. Sarah had spent 3 years tracking it down through private collectors in Europe. She had sold her grandmother's ring to buy it. Alexander looked at Sarah. "Sarah," he sighed into the microphone. "I appreciate the thought, but Isabel is right. We're moving forward. Maybe we can keep this in the garage." The crowd roared with laughter. Something inside Sarah snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a bridge collapsing after holding too much weight for too long. She looked at Alexander. Really looked at him. She saw the weak chin his beard hid. She saw the greed in his eyes. She saw a stranger. "The garage," Sarah repeated. "Don't be dramatic," Alexander hissed, covering the mic. "Go sit down. You're embarrassing me." "Yes," Isabel chimed in, leaning close to Sarah. Her voice a whisper only they could hear. "Go back to the suburbs, Sarah. Let the adults handle the business. Honestly, looking at you makes me sad. You're like a stain on his Italian suit." Sarah looked at Isabel. For the first time in years, Sarah stood up straight. Her posture shifted. The meekness evaporated, replaced by a cold, aristocratic rigidity that neither Alexander nor Isabel had ever seen. "You think that book is trash," Sarah said clearly into the microphone. She stepped closer, grabbing the mic stand so firmly her knuckles turned white. "It looks like trash," Isabel scoffed. "That book," Sarah said, her voice ringing out with a sudden commanding authority, contains the original logistics routes mapped by Alexander's grandfather. But more importantly, on the last page, it contains the bearer bonds and the controlling shares of Vanguard Holdings. The room went quiet. Vanguard Holdings was the parent company of Thorne and Cotu. It was the entity that actually owned the building they were standing in. Alexander frowned. "What are you talking about? Vanguard is owned by a shell corporation in the Caymans. Nobody knows who runs it." "I know who runs it," Sarah said. She walked over to the table and picked up the trash book. She opened it carefully to the back cover. There, tucked into a hidden leather pocket, was a document stamped with wax seals. She pulled it out. "Because I am Vanguard Holdings," Sarah declared. Isabel laughed again, but this time it sounded nervous. You're a housewife. You clip coupons. You drive a Honda." "I clip coupons because I hate waste," Sarah said, her eyes locking onto Isabel's. "And I drive a Honda because I don't feel the need to wear my bank account on my wrist." Sarah turned to the crowd. "My maiden name is not Bennett. That was my mother's name to protect me from people like you." She gestured to Isabel. "My father was Harrison Sterling." A gasp, loud and sharp, went through the room. Harrison Sterling was a legend, an oil and shipping magnate who had died mysteriously 20 years ago, leaving his fortune to a lost daughter no one could find. "Liar," Alexander whispered, his face draining of color. You told me your dad was a mechanic." "He was," Sarah said. "He liked to fix classic cars in his spare time. He also owned half the Pacific seaboard. Sarah looked down at the document in her hand. I bought the majority stake in Thorne and Comey this morning. I wanted to give you this journal as a sign that I was ready to invest fully in you, Alexander. To finally merge my family's resources with yours. I was going to sign this over to you tonight, as a birthday gift. She held up the document. It was a transfer of ownership. I was going to make you the owner of the largest shipping conglomerate in the world. Alexander reached out his hands, shaking violently. Sarah. Baby. Wait. Sarah ripped the document in half. The sound of the tearing paper was louder than the music had been. But, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm, I see now that you prefer the watch and the mistress. She dropped the torn pieces of paper onto the floor at Isabel's feet. Happy birthday, Alexander. You're fired. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a tsunami. Alexander stood frozen, his hand half extended toward the torn paper. Isabel looked down at the scraps, her brain trying to process the mathematics of what just happened. Harrison Sterling. Billions. Controlling interest. You can't fire him, Isabel shrieked, her voice cracking. This is his company. His father built it. Sarah turned her dress, swirling around her ankles. His father built a trucking company. My capital turned it into a global logistics firm. Check the board of directors, Isabel. Who is the chairman? The chairman is S.H. Trust. Alexander stammered. Sarah Harrison Trust, Sarah clarified. She looked at the crowd of stunned investors. I apologize for the disruption. The open bar will remain open for another hour. However, the new administration of Thorne and Comey will be conducting a full audit of the marketing department starting tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. She looked directly at Isabel. I suggest you update your resume. Although given the embezzlement investigation I'm about to launch regarding the promotional budget, you might need a lawyer more than a resume. Isabel's face went from red to ghostly white. Sarah walked off the stage. The crowd, the same crowd that had mocked her 5 minutes ago, parted like the Red Sea. People bowed their heads. Some looked terrified. Sarah, Sarah, please! Alexander scrambled down the stairs, tripping over his own feet. He grabbed her arm. Sarah stopped and looked at his hand on her arm. Let go. We can talk about this, Alexander pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. It was a joke. The laughing. It was just stress. You know I love you. Isabel means nothing to me. She's just an employee. Behind them on stage, Isabel gasped. Excuse me. She means nothing, Alexander yelled back at Isabel, desperate to save his sinking ship. Sarah is my wife. Sarah laughed. It was a soft, dry sound. You chose the diamond watch, Alex. You chose the glitter. Now you have to live with it. She pulled her arm free. I'm freezing the joint accounts in 10 minutes. I suggest you transfer enough for a cab ride home. Sarah walked out of the ballroom doors, leaving the golden light behind her. She stepped into the cool San Francisco night, where a black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb. A uniformed driver opened the door. To the airport, Miss Sterling, the driver asked. Yes, James, Sarah said, sliding into the leather interior. Take me to the private hangar. I'm done with this city. Back inside, the chaos was just beginning. The hangover from the gala wasn't physical. It was existential. Alexander sat on the edge of the king-sized bed in the presidential suite of the Fairmont. It was 3:00 a.m. He was still wearing his tuxedo pants and the white dress shirt, now unbuttoned and stained with sweat. The Patek Philippe watch, the symbol of his triumph, sat on the nightstand. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, the diamonds didn't sparkle. They looked cold, like jagged ice. Isabel was in the bathroom. She had been in there for an hour, frantically making phone calls. Through the heavy oak door, Alexander could hear her muffled screaming. "What do you mean? The company card is declined. It's a black card. Run it again." Silence. Then the sound of something porcelain shattering against the wall. Alexander put his head in his hands. His mind was replaying the loop of the last 4 hours, the tearing of the paper, the name, Harrison Sterling. The look in Sarah's eyes, not of anger, but of absolute, crushing indifference. The bathroom door flew open. Isabel stormed out. She had scrubbed her makeup off, leaving her face raw and pale. Without the contouring and the false lashes, she looked younger, but also harder. Desperate. "They cut us off," she hissed, throwing her phone onto the duvet. "I tried to order room service. A bottle of water, Alex. Just water. The card was declined. I tried my personal card. Declined. I tried your personal card that you gave me for emergencies. Declined." Alexander looked up slowly. She said she was freezing the assets. "She can't do that," Isabel shrieked, pacing the room like a caged tiger. Her emerald dress was crumpled in a pile on the floor. She was wearing a hotel bathrobe that suddenly looked too big for her. "It's your company. You're the CEO. You can't just fire the CEO and freeze his bank accounts in the middle of the night because of a bad breakup." "It wasn't a breakup, Isabel," Alexander said, his voice hollow. "It was a hostile takeover, and it wasn't my company. I see that now." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. The fog was rolling in, swallowing the Transamerica Pyramid. "My father," Alexander started, his voice trembling. "My father always told me that we had a silent partner who injected capital when the business was failing in the 90s. He said the partner wanted anonymity. I thought it was the cartel, or maybe some government black ops fund. I never asked." He turned to look at Isabel. "It was Sarah. She's been funding us since before we were married. When I was in grad school, when I failed that first startup, the money that miraculously appeared. It was her. So she played you," Isabel spat. "She lied to you for 10 years. That makes her a psychopath. Alex, you're the victim here, am I?" Alexander laughed bitterly. "I cheated on the woman who secretly built my throne. And I did it with the woman who just broke a soap dish because she couldn't order a $12 water." Isabel narrowed her eyes. "Careful, Alex. You need me right now. I'm the only one in your corner." "Are you?" Alexander walked over to the nightstand and picked up the watch. He weighed it in his hand. "Or are you just worried about the audit?" Isabel froze. The color drained from her face entirely. "What do you know?" she whispered. "I know the marketing budget has been overblown by 200% for the last 3 quarters. Alexander said softly. "I signed off on it because I was sleeping with the VP of marketing. I thought you were spending it on influencers and billboards. But if Sarah's auditors look closely, what are they going to find, Isabel?" Isabel didn't answer. She turned away, biting her thumbnail. The morning sun rose grey and unforgiving. At 7:30 a.m. they tried to leave the hotel. The front desk manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had greeted Alexander by name for 5 years, did not smile. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, his face impassive, "your credit on file has been suspended. The bill for the suite, the gala usage, and the damages to the bathroom comes to $42,000. Alexander patted his pockets. Mr. Henderson, there's been a banking error. Put it on the corporate tab. The corporate account has flagged your authorization as terminated, Henderson said. He signaled to two large security guards standing near the potted palms. We will need a valid form of payment, or we will have to involve the authorities. Isabel stepped behind Alexander, using him as a shield. Here, Alexander said, his hands shaking as he unclasped the Patek Philippe watch. He slammed it onto the marble counter. It's worth $80,000. Take it. Keep the change. He grabbed Isabel's arm and dragged her out the revolving doors before Henderson could protest. They stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind whipping their faces. No chauffeur, no Rolls-Royce. Uber? Isabel asked weakly. Apps linked to the card, Alexander muttered. We walk. They walked 6 blocks to the Thorne and Cobain headquarters. It was a humiliating procession. The CEO in a stained tuxedo and the VP in a hotel bathrobe and heels, shivering as commuters stared at them. When they reached the glass skyscraper, the lobby was chaos. There were men in dark suits everywhere. They were carrying boxes. Not boxes into the building, but boxes out of it. Alexander pushed through the revolving door. He saw his executive assistant Jessica crying near the reception desk. She was holding a cardboard box containing a stapler and a potted plant. Jessica, Alexander called out. What's happening? Jessica looked up. Her eyes were red. She looked at Alexander with a mixture of pity and disgust. They fired us, Mr. Thorne. The whole executive floor. Everyone appointed by you in the last 2 years. Who? Alexander demanded. Who is doing this? I am, a deep voice boomed. A man stepped out of the elevator bank. He was older with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Alexander's car. He walked with a cane, but he didn't look frail. He looked like a weapon. Marcus Vane, Alexander breathed. Marcus Vane was a legend in corporate law. He was known as the guillotine. He didn't just win cases. He dismantled the opposition so thoroughly they couldn't find work at a fast food chain afterwards. Mr. Thorne, Vane said smoothly, stopping 3 feet away. And Miss DuPont. How convenient of you to arrive. It saves us the cost of serving you the papers at your residence. 2 junior associates stepped forward and shoved thick envelopes into Alexander and Isabel's chests. What is this? Isabel cried. Notice of termination for cause, Vane recited, sounding bored. Gross misconduct, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and conducting personal affairs on company time. We have the logs, Miss DuPont, the business trips to Cabo, the client dinners that were just you and Mr. Thorne at Michelin star restaurants. It's all itemized. You can't prove anything, Isabel yelled. We have the emails, Vane smiled. It was a shark's smile. Mrs. Thorne, excuse me. Ms. Sterling has had a forensic IT team mirroring your servers for 6 months. She has every email, every text, every deleted draft. Alexander felt the room spin. 6 months. She's known. For 6 months, she wanted to give you a chance, Vane said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She waited. She hoped you would end the affair. She hoped you would remember who stood by you when you were nothing. But last night, when you let that woman laugh at her family legacy, Vane leaned in closer. That was the nail in your coffin, son. Vane tapped his cane on the floor. Security. 4 guards approached. Escort these trespassers off the premises. If they return, arrest them. My laptop, Alexander protested, as a guard grabbed his arm. My contacts. Property of Vanguard Holdings, Vane said, turning his back. Goodbye, Mr. Thorne. thrown out onto the pavement for the second time that morning, Alexander looked up at the building that bore his name. He watched as a workman on a ladder began to peel the vinyl letters of Thorn off the glass facade. The descent from master of the universe to unemployed adulterer took less than 12 hours. Alexander and Isabel retreated to the only place they had left. The penthouse apartment Alexander and Sarah had shared for the last 5 years. The ride up in the elevator was silent. The tension was so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the shaft. Isabel was scrolling through her phone, which was now blowing up with notifications. "My Instagram," she whispered, horrified. "The comments. Someone leaked the video of the gala. They're calling me. Oh, God." "Stop reading it," Alexander snapped. "They're calling me a dollar store gold digger," Isabel cried. "And they're calling you the idiot who sold the moon for a lamp post." The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. Alexander stepped out, expecting the comfort of home. The beige sofas, the Art Deco lamps, the smell of Sarah's vanilla candles. Instead, he stepped into a void. The apartment was gutted. The furniture was gone. The paintings were gone. The rugs were gone. The curtains had been pulled down. The vast living room was nothing but an expanse of cold hardwood floor. "What the hell?" Isabel's voice echoed in the empty space. Alexander ran to the bedroom. Empty. The closet where his suits usually hung in color-coordinated rows was bare. Even the hangers were gone. He ran to the kitchen. The fridge was open and empty. The cabinets were stripped. On the marble island, the only thing remaining in the entire 4,000-square-foot apartment sat a single, small object. It was a coupon. Alexander picked it up. It was a buy one, get one free coupon for a frozen pizza brand that Sarah used to buy when they were poor. She had clipped it from a circular. Next to the coupon was a post-it note in Sarah's neat, cursive handwriting. "Since you like things that look cheap but cost a lot, you can have the apartment. The rent is $15,000 a month. Lease is in your name. Good luck. S." "She took everything," Alexander whispered. "She even took the toaster." "She can't do this!" Isabel screamed, her voice bouncing off the empty walls. "This is community property. The furniture was hers," Alexander said, staring at the coupon. "She brought it from her grandmother's estate. The art, she bought it with her savings. It's all hers." Isabel slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. "We have nothing, Alex. I have $200 in cash in my purse. My accounts are frozen pending the investigation. You have a watch you gave away to a hotel manager. How are we going to eat? How are we going to pay the rent?" Alexander ignored her. He felt a sudden, desperate need to see Sarah, not to yell at her, not to beg for money, but to see her face. He needed to understand who he had actually been married to. The meek woman who made him tuna sandwiches was gone. In her place was a titan. And strangely, terrifyingly, Alexander realized he found this new, ruthless Sarah incredibly compelling. He needed to find her. "Stay here," Alexander said, grabbing his car keys from the counter, then remembering his company car was likely being towed right now. "Damn it." "Where are you going?" Isabel demanded. "I'm going to find my wife." "She's not your wife anymore," Isabel yelled after him. "She's your executioner." Alexander ran down the fire escape stairs. 40 flights. By the time he reached the street, his legs were jelly. He hailed a taxi, praying he had enough loose cash in his pocket to cover it. "Where to?" the driver asked. Alexander paused. Where would she go? She wouldn't go to her parents' old house. That was a lie. Harrison Sterling's daughter wouldn't live in a shack. He remembered something. Years ago, Sarah had mentioned a little getaway spot she liked to drive to when he was busy working late, or as he now knew when he was with Isabel. She said it was near the cliffs in Big Sur. She called it the Aviary. Big Sur, Alexander said. Drive. That's a 3-hour ride, buddy. Gonna cost you $300 minimum. Alexander pulled out his wallet. He had $400 in emergency cash. He handed $300 to the driver. Just drive. The drive was agonizing. Alexander stared out the window as the city gave way to the winding coastal roads. He tried to call Sarah's phone. It went straight to voicemail. The subscriber you are trying to reach has upgraded to a private network. 3 hours later, the taxi dropped him off at the coordinates Alexander had found on an old shared location app he hadn't checked in years. He stood before a massive iron gate. Behind it, a long driveway wound up a cliffside, disappearing into the mist. This wasn't a little getaway spot. It was a fortress. Alexander walked up to the intercom. He pressed the buzzer. "State your business," a voice crackled. It wasn't Sarah. It was a security guard. "It's Alexander. Alexander Thorne. I need to speak to Sarah." Silence. "Mrs. Sterling is not accepting visitors," the voice said. "Mrs. Sterling?" The name stung. She had already dropped his name. Tell her I know about the baby." It was a lie, a desperate Hail Mary lie. They had never talked about kids seriously. He was always too busy. But he hoped it would shock her enough to open the gate. The intercom clicked. A long pause. Then the heavy iron gates began to groan. They swung open slowly. Alexander's heart hammered in his chest. He began the long walk up the driveway. The air smelled of salt and pine. As he rounded the final bend, the house came into view. It was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, perched on the edge of the world, overlooking the crashing Pacific Ocean. It looked like something out of a movie, and there, standing on the expansive deck, wrapped in a white cashmere shawl, holding a glass of dark red wine, was Sarah. She didn't look like the librarian anymore. The wind whipped her hair back. She looked like a queen in her castle watching a peasant approach the moat. Alexander reached the bottom of the deck stairs. He was out of breath, sweaty, and still wearing his ruined tuxedo pants. He looked up at her. "Sarah," he gasped. She looked down at him, taking a slow sip of wine. "You walked up the hill," she observed. "You used to complain about walking from the car to the restaurant." "I lied," Alexander said, his chest heaving. "About the baby. I needed you to see me." "I see you, Alexander," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was bored. "I see a man who had everything and threw it away for a cheap thrill." "It wasn't a thrill," Alexander pleaded, climbing the first step. "I was insecure. You were always so perfect, so patient. It made me feel small. Isabel made me feel big." "And now," Sarah asked, "do you feel big now standing in my driveway, homeless and jobless?" "I feel like a fool," Alexander admitted, tears pricking his eyes. "Sarah, I don't care about the money. I don't. I just want you back. I want us back." Sarah swirled the wine in her glass. She looked at him with a pity that was worse than hatred. "You don't want me, Alex. You want the safety I provided. You want the silent partner back." She set the glass down on the railing. "But here is the twist, Alexander. You said you lied about the baby to get into the gate." Alexander nodded. Sarah placed a hand on her stomach. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Well," she whispered, the wind carrying her voice down to him, Ironically, that was the only thing you've been right about all day. Alexander's jaw dropped. The world stopped spinning. You're 8 weeks, Sarah said. I found out the day before the gala. I was going to tell you on stage, after I gave you the journal. We were going to start a family, Alex, a real dynasty. She turned her back on him. But now my lawyers will be in touch regarding custody. Don't worry. We'll make sure the child knows who their father was. We'll show them pictures. Sarah. No. Alexander lunged up the stairs. 2 large men in black tactical gear stepped out from the glass doors, blocking his path. They didn't look like hotel security. They looked like mercenaries. Escort Mr. Thorne to the main road, Sarah ordered without looking back. And if he resists, well, we have good insurance. As the guards grabbed Alexander by the arms and dragged him backward, he screamed her name. He screamed until his voice gave out. But Sarah Sterling never turned around. She simply walked into her glass house and closed the door, shutting him out of paradise forever. Back in the city in the empty penthouse, Isabel's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered it, trembling. Hello. Isabel DuPont, a distorted voice asked. Yes. You have something Sarah Sterling wants, and if you give it to us, you might stay out of prison. Isabel's eyes widened. She looked around the empty apartment. I have nothing. She took everything. You have the passwords, the voice said, to Alexander's offshore crypto accounts, the ones he tried to hide from the audit. Isabel paused. She looked at the door Alexander had run out of. She thought about him leaving her there with nothing. If I give them to you, Isabel whispered, do I get a deal? You get a plane ticket to non-extradition country, the voice promised, and a fresh start. Isabel smiled. It was a broken, jagged smile. Get a pen, she said. I'm ready to talk. The penthouse was no longer a home. It was a crime scene of a life that had imploded. Isabel DuPont sat on the floor of the empty living room, the hardwood cold against her legs. The only light came from the city glow outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the same city she used to think she owned. Now San Francisco looked like a monster waiting to swallow her whole. She held the phone to her ear, her hand trembling so violently that the device kept tapping against her diamond earring, one of the few things she had managed to hide in her bra before the security guards escorted her out of the office. I'm listening, Isabel whispered into the phone. Smart girl, the distorted voice on the other end replied. It was a voice devoid of empathy, mechanical and precise. Here is the situation, Ms. DuPont. The forensic accounting team has found the discrepancies in the marketing budget. $2 million siphoned into a shell company called Blue Horizon Consulting. Isabel squeezed her eyes shut. Blue Horizon. That was Alexander's idea. He swore it was untraceable. He swore it was their escape fund for when he eventually left Sarah. I didn't sign those checks. Isabel stammered, her survival instinct kicking into overdrive. Alexander did. He was the CEO. I just submessigned the invoices. And that makes you an accessory to corporate fraud, grand larceny, and embezzlement, the voice droned. Prison time for that is approximately 15 years. In a federal facility, no designer clothes, no skincare routine, just grey walls and bad food. A sob escaped Isabel's throat. The image was too vivid. She was a creature of comfort. Prison would kill her in a week. But, the voice continued, Mrs. Sterling is not interested in a small fish like you. She wants the architect. She wants Alexander. What do I have to do? Isabel asked, her voice hardening. The tears stopped. Panic was replaced by calculation. Alexander has a private ledger, a digital key to the crypto accounts where the bulk of the stolen money is hidden. We know it exists, but we cannot access it without the seed phrase. He kept it offline, on paper. Isabel's eyes darted around the empty room. He doesn't trust clouds. He wrote it down. Find it, the voice commanded. You have 1 hour before the FBI arrives at the penthouse to execute a search warrant. If you hand us that ledger before they get there, you become a cooperating witness. You walk away. If the FBI finds it first, you go down with the ship. The line went dead. Isabel scrambled to her feet. She looked at the front door. Alexander was still gone, chasing after Sarah in Big Sur. She had an hour. She ran to the master bedroom. Where would he hide it? Alexander wasn't a genius, but he was paranoid. He wouldn't put it in a safe. Safes were the first place people looked. She tore open the vents. Nothing. She checked the hollow curtain rods. Nothing. Then she remembered the trash gift. The diary. Alexander had mocked Sarah for being sentimental, but Alexander himself had a strange attachment to his old college thing, a beaten-up copy of The Great Gatsby he kept on his bedside table. He claimed it was the only book he ever finished. She ran to where the nightstand used to be. The furniture was gone, but a small pile of junk Sarah's movers had left behind sat in the corner. Old receipts, a broken pen, and the book. Isabel grabbed the paperback. She fanned through the pages. Nothing. She threw it against the wall in frustration. The book hit the plaster, and the back cover split slightly. Isabel froze. She crawled over to the book. She peeled back the glued lining of the rear cover. There, written in microscopic handwriting on the cardboard backing, was a string of 12 random words. Giant. River. Signal. Toast. Velvet. Anchor. The seed phrase? The keys to $4 million of stolen company money. Isabel stared at it. This was Alexander's life raft. If she gave this up, he would be destitute. He would go to prison for a very long time. He would have nothing. She thought about Alexander standing in the ballroom, letting the crowd laugh at Sarah. She thought about how easily he had turned on Sarah, a woman who had supported him for a decade. If he could do that to her, Isabel realized with a chilling clarity, he will do it to me, the moment it becomes convenient. She ripped the back cover off the book. The elevator chimed. Isabel spun around, clutching the cardboard to her chest. It wasn't the FBI. It was Alexander. He looked like a ghost. His tuxedo shirt was torn. His shoes were covered in mud from the hike up Sarah's driveway, and his eyes were red and swollen. He slumped against the doorframe, defeated. She's pregnant. Alexander whispered the words, falling out of his mouth like stones. She's having my baby, Isabel. And she had security throw me off a cliffside. He looked up at Isabel, expecting comfort, expecting an ally. We have to figure this out. We have to lawyer up. I'll use the crypto money. It's enough to get us to Brazil. We can start over. He walked toward her, reaching out a hand. We're in this together, right? You and me against the world. Isabel looked at his hand. It was dirty. She looked at the cardboard in her own hand. I'm sorry, Alex, she said softly. Sorry for what? He frowned, confused. The elevator chimed again. This time it was followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots. Police! A voice shouted. Federal agents, open up! Alexander panicked. The ledger, Isabel. Where is the book? I need the codes. We need to run. Isabel took a step back away from him. Isabel! Alexander's eyes went wide. "Give me the codes." "I can't," she said, her voice steady now. "I made a deal." Alexander stopped. The betrayal hit him harder than the physical exhaustion. You sold me out. You taught me well, didn't you?" Isabel replied coldly. "It's just business, Alex." The door burst open. 6 agents in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back swarmed the room. Guns were drawn. Alexander Thorne, hands in the air. As they shoved Alexander against the wall and cuffed his hands behind his back, he twisted his head to look at Isabel. She was standing calmly by the window, handing the piece of cardboard to a man in a suit who had walked in behind the agents. The man took the cardboard, checked it, and nodded to Isabel. "You're free to go, Ms. DuPont," the man said. Isabel picked up her purse. She walked past Alexander without making eye contact. "Isabel!" Alexander screamed, thrashing against the agents. "I left her for you. I ruined my life for you." Isabel paused at the elevator. She pressed the button. As the doors opened, she looked back one last time. "No, Alex," she said, pressing the button for the lobby. "You ruined your life because you're greedy. I was just the accessory." The doors closed, leaving Alexander alone with his consequences. 6 months later. The United States District Court for the Northern District of California was packed. It was the trial of the decade. The United States versus Alexander Thorne. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and anxiety. Reporters lined the back benches, their pens poised over notepads, hungry for the final chapter of the billionaire bachelor scandal. Alexander sat at the defense table. He had lost 30 pounds. His hair, once perfectly gelled, was thinning and grey at the temples. He wore an ill-fitting suit provided by his public defender, a harried woman named Ms. Klein, who had 20 other cases that week. There was no high-priced legal team. The assets had been frozen, seized, and returned to Thorne and Colum. Alexander couldn't even afford bail. He had spent the last 6 months in county jail, listening to the other inmates talk about the news. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrington entered a stern woman with glasses perched on her nose. She sat down and looked at the docket. "We are here for sentencing and final victim impact statements." Alexander swallowed hard. He refused to look at the gallery. He knew who was there. "The prosecution calls Sarah Sterling," the district attorney announced. A hush fell over the room. The heavy wooden doors opened. Sarah walked in. If Alexander looked like a ruin, Sarah looked like a monument. She wore a cream-colored maternity dress that draped elegantly over her heavy stomach. She was 8 months pregnant. She walked with a cane, not because she needed it, but because it gave her an air of regal authority. She didn't look at Alexander. She walked to the witness stand, swore on the Bible, and sat down. "Mrs. Sterling," the DA began, "can you tell the court how Mr. Thorne's actions affected the company?" "He nearly destroyed it," Sarah said, her voice clear and melodic. "He fired competent staff to hire sycophants. He diverted funds meant for safety inspections into his personal offshore accounts. He treated a legacy built by families as his personal piggy bank." "And on a personal level?" the DA asked softly. Sarah turned her head. For the first time in half a year, she looked at Alexander. Alexander flinched. He expected anger. He expected screaming. But Sarah's eyes were empty. It was the look one gives to a dead insect found on a windowsill. "He stole 10 years of my life," Sarah said. "He made me believe that love was about sacrifice, about making yourself small so someone else could feel big. He took my money, my trust, and my dignity. And when I tried to give him a gift, a journal that contained the history of his own family, he laughed. She paused, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. But I want to thank him, the courtroom murmured. Alexander looked up confused. Thank him? The DA asked. Yes. Sarah continued. If he hadn't been so arrogant, if he hadn't been so cruel that night at the gala, I might never have woken up. I might have stayed in the shadows forever. His betrayal forced me to step into the light. It forced me to take back my name, my company, and my future. She looked at the judge. I don't ask for vengeance, Your Honor. I ask for justice. Not for me, but for the thousands of employees whose pensions he gambled with, and for this child who deserves to know that actions have consequences. Sarah stood up to leave the stand. Wait, Alexander shouted, standing up. Sarah, please, I'm the father. Doesn't that mean anything? The judge banged her gavel. Mr. Thorne, sit down. Sarah stopped. She turned slowly. You are a sperm donor, Alexander, she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room. A father is a man who protects his family. You protected nothing but your ego. She walked back to her seat in the front row, flanked by Marcus Vane. The prosecution calls its final witness, the DA said. Isabel DuPont. Alexander felt the blood leave his head. No, not her. She wouldn't. Isabel entered from a side door. She looked different, modest. She wore a grey cardigan and flat shoes. She wouldn't look at Alexander at all. She took the stand. Ms. DuPont, the DA said, you were the defendant's mistress and co-conspirator, correct? Yes, Isabel said quietly. And did Mr. Thorne explicitly tell you why he was moving money to the Blue Horizon accounts? Yes, Isabel said. She leaned into the microphone. He told me that Sarah was a boring anchor. He said he wanted to bleed the company dry before he divorced her, so that when the settlement came, there would be nothing left for her to take. He wanted to leave her with zero. A collective gasp went through the room. The jury looked at Alexander with pure disgust. Liar! Alexander screamed. It was your idea. You wanted the yachts. You wanted the trips. Order! Judge Harrington yelled. Isabel looked at him then. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was steely. I was greedy, Alex. I admit that. That's why I'm doing community service and probation. But you were malicious. You wanted to destroy her just because she was good, and you weren't. Isabel stepped down. The trial concluded swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledger Isabel provided, the testimony, the emails Sarah's team had recovered. Judge Harrington shuffled her papers. She looked over her glasses at Alexander. Alexander Thorne, you have lived a life of supreme privilege. You were given a company you didn't earn, a wife you didn't deserve, and opportunities most people only dream of. And you responded with greed and malice. The judge took a breath. On the count of grand larceny, guilty. On the count of securities fraud, guilty. On the count of embezzlement, guilty. I sentence you to 25 years in a federal correctional facility with no possibility of parole for the first 20. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. Two marshals grabbed Alexander's arms. Sarah, Alexander wailed as they dragged him away. Sarah, look at me. I'm sorry, I love you. Sarah didn't turn around. She was busy looking at a document Marcus Vane had just handed her. It was the new organizational chart for Thorn and Konu, renaming it to Sterling Logistics. As Alexander was hauled through the side door, kicking and screaming. Sarah stood up. She smoothed her dress. Isabel was waiting by the exit. As Sarah passed, Isabel lowered her head. "Mrs. Sterling," Isabel whispered. I'm sorry." Sarah stopped. She looked at the woman who had helped destroy her marriage. "You were a tool, Isabel," Sarah said coolly. "A hammer used to break a wall. I don't hate the hammer. I just put it back in the toolbox." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a card. "But if you ever come near me or my child again," Sarah whispered, leaning in close, "I will make sure you never work in this hemisphere again." "Do we understand each other?" "Yes," Isabel breathed. "Good." Sarah Sterling walked out of the courthouse doors and into the blinding sunlight. A crowd of photographers was waiting. Flashbulbs popped. "Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, what will you do now?" a reporter shouted. Sarah smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. She placed a hand on her belly. "Now," she said, "now I have a company to run, and a nursery to paint." She stepped into the waiting car, not a Rolls-Royce, but a sensible armored SUV. The door closed, shutting out the noise, leaving the drama behind, and moving forward into a future she finally owned completely. And that is the tragic fall of Alexander Thorn. He had a diamond in his hand, but he traded it for a glittery stone, only to realize too late that the diamond was the one holding up his entire world. It's a brutal reminder. Never underestimate the quiet ones, and never ever judge a gift or a person by their wrapping paper. Sarah didn't just get revenge. She got justice. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have forgiven him, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next dramatic story. Thanks for watching.